Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology. This is an interview about Paul Stephenson's first full poetry collection, Hard Drive. And during this conversation, we discuss the process of writing about grief and the challenges that come with writing and publishing a poetry collection. I hope you enjoy this interview and I will see you at the end. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview for Poetology.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
I'm so glad you're here. Today we're talking about your first full-length poetry collection, Hard Drive. What motivated you to write this collection?
I can't say I really set out to write this book. The kind of book crept up on me, I suppose, as I started accumulating poems. I just started writing on and around loss, the death of a long-term partner, exploring bereavement. Yeah, I was just building up all of these poems. And at one stage, I thought maybe there's a pamphlet here. But as the number of poems grew, I realized I had probably a manuscript, which I originally thought might be a second book once I've actually put a book out there that draws on my pamphlets, draws on all my other uncollected work, because I've been writing for about 15 years. And these poems here are from 2016 onwards. I talked a lot with my friends online, my workshop groups, about which poems I should be putting forward, really, and thinking if I'm only going to have one collection, which is it going to be? And which are the poems I really want to put out into the world? So it seemed like these were the poems that really mattered. They were very, very personal. And I actually put together two manuscripts, two books, and I sent to Carcanet at the submissions window. And when I followed up 6 months later, the editors said, they'd been deliberating on both, but they really felt that the Hard Drive manuscript was the most original, and that they thought it would be better to kind of profile and foreground that collection. So yeah, I ended up just writing poems exploring the various stages of bereavement, all the practicalities of, of dealing with a death, of loss, all the emotional kind of responses, the stages of grief. So it's a kind of exploration of what it is to deal with death in the immediate aftermath, all the rituals, the routines, the performances and everything around, the loss of a same-sex partner. But I think it's a book that speaks to anybody who's lost someone. So I didn't set out, in a nutshell, I didn't really set out to write this book. It just evolved.
How did you experience the writing process of Hard Drive?
Some poems just came to me naturally in my own time. Quite a lot of the poems came out through workshops, through prompts, either through online residential weekends during COVID, some of them, or meeting face-to-face, have a Saturday morning workshop group who I would write with and also edit. So yeah, they came at different times. I think every time I had a new poem as a prompt, I always had him sitting on my shoulder. I was always channeling grief through whatever kind of writing exercise I was doing, whether it's on my own or within a group. Sometimes the first line of a poem, or sometimes the device in a poem. I did write some poems, where I was going into delicate places using medical documents or, death admin, using erasure to block out certain details, but wanting to keep the language of bureaucracy. So there were some poems in the book I was nervous about, particularly in the final section of the book. But then I set a reserve poems to my editor, John McAuliffe, and he said, no, it's not distasteful, it's risk-taking, it's original, and it works as a poem. In this case, poems where you keep pushing on, you don't quite know where the poem is going. Some poems I did hold back in the end, they were too personal, and there were some things I didn't write about, I chose not to write about. But generally, I just thought, gosh, there are so many books on loss and bereavement that, if you're going to write about grief and about losing someone close, you've got to find new ways to do it. You've got to find new ways to be original, and you've got to take risks. Some poems might fall flat, but you've got to take the risk. And obviously, you need to turn what is very immediate and personal into something a little bit more removed and universal, so that the poem will operate in its own right and speak to anybody, who has experienced loss. So yeah, the writing process was, I don't know, a bit haphazard, and over 6 years of poems there, and a year of editing afterwards.
Right, thank you. Found it difficult to describe the style you're writing in because sometimes it employs humor, but there's a lot of tenderness in it, and there's a lot of space for joy, sadness, and also a sense of absurdity sometimes. You use also many forms, so there's wordplay, there are lists, repetitions, variations on a certain model, as you said, also erasure. I was wondering, I mean, that's probably a style you've developed over many years too, but how did the tone and style of that collection take shape?
Yeah, thanks for noticing the kind of the mix of styles at play here in the collection. I think there is certainly a mix of sadness and sorrow alongside the more absurd, comic poems that or humor. There's wordplay and lists, repetition, the ridiculous and the absurd. I mean, I've always been interested in the human comedy. I think, I was trying out stuff in my earlier pamphlets, like even from those people onwards. There's a whole cast of characters there, and I was picking up on the kind of absurdity of life and the fragility of it also. Um, also when you're writing around grief and you're doing something that's so sad and sorrowful, there's so much sincerity that you get to a point where it does become kind of absurd in the kind of emotional outpouring. And grief is super self-indulgent as well. So I was just trying to just play with the idea of self-indulgence, and because often it's about you, isn't it? You're the one left behind. It's sort of me, me, me. So when things get too earnest and sincere, I suppose it's a place to go to, a bit like the surreal. You can go towards the comic to just try to make light of the very serious situation, I think. I mean, there are 6 sections to the book. Obviously, I start off serious. I set the scene because the book is in 6 parts and reads a little bit like a novel in poems, at least in the first half, the practicalities of dealing with a death. The second half goes back in time. So I have some very serious poems at the beginning, but then I have poems like humorous elbowings, condolences, where I let in the ridiculous. I didn't want the reader's emotional response to be conditioned, from page 1 of the book, and that people must feel sad and sorrowful throughout the whole book. I wanted every page you turn, every new poem, you to have to question what your emotional response is. Is this funny? Is this serious? How should I respond? And that also then makes it a little bit more varied emotionally in terms of form, in terms of shape, in terms of mood of the poems. And then, in poems like The Hymn of Him, there's a kind of music that emerges through wordplay. In Nurture, I use the word tomato again and again as a kind of filler word. In Starchitect, I use lots of new words from the OED to write a lament, but without even knowing what the words mean. Revisiting the relationship in the second half of the book as well, revisiting some of the absurdity of being in a relationship, cohabitation, the funny moments, the anecdotes. When I put the book together, I hadn't realized how many professionals there were and how many characters who I give a name to. So it's a bit like a kind of soap opera of bereavement. And soap opera is also, serious drama underpinned by comic elements. So I think there's all the stages of grief there. And I hope that using these different forms and word plays, lists, repetitions, that was a way of having a go at exploring these various stages of grief, even if it's not entirely in a linear way.
Yeah, and you said it took many years to write. So you've written quite a lot over that time. Was that an integral part to your own grieving process? What did it feel like once it was published?
I think it was my way of grieving. It's a cliche about, write it out, but that's what you do. And probably I should have had some counseling and some therapy, but I didn't. I was writing poems. And writing the poems was also a bit like an extension of the relationship. There's a lot of poems that take a direct address, that talk to you. So it's a bit like having a dialogue, even like having a collaboration, really, with somebody who's gone, because I couldn't obviously have written the book without him, not the book that I really wanted to write. So it's like an extension of a relationship. It's like a collaborative project in a way. I mean, that's how you try to justify it. And I think getting the book out there, I mean, that was a huge relief. You've written all this work. You want readers. You want to tell your story. So when it was published and it was out, I was massively relieved. After, all those years of writing and not actually knowing, am I going to ever get a publisher? Am I going to get the publisher I would really like? Is this ever going to see the light of day? That was also in parallel a kind of very trying time, mentally. When you really believe in some of the poems and you're finding good homes for all the individual poems in magazines, but you're like, am I going to manage to bring this together? And is there a book here?
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that feeling. And it's interesting. I mean, I think people maybe underestimate how hard it is for poets because you've published three pamphlets before, all with different publishers, and you have yet a fourth publisher for this collection. It's like we're always looking for someone who will take on our work.
Yeah, I'd had three brilliant publishers. Smith Dorstop for my first pamphlet. You know, Anne and Peter Sansom have been very, very encouraging towards me as a writer in my own development poetry business. And then, you know, Nell Nelson at Happenstance really believed in the Paris poems when I was living in Paris and wrote in the aftermath of the terrorist attack. And then I won the Paper Swans competition, which was fantastic. And of course, in a normal first collection, you would probably take a third of those poems in the book would be from previous pamphlets. I mean, I have a lot of uncollected work that's been in magazines. And now, of course, is the question of which of those poems do I bring forward in a second book? You know, do any of those uncollected poems go into a book? Because it's got to really be in response to hard drive now, I suppose. Anything I publish in the future will be not a sequel, but it will have to be in dialogue in some way. I mean, you can do something completely new, but it's a big question.
In what ways do you find it different when you write for a pamphlet rather than writing for a full collection? Or maybe it's a more organic process for you.
Obviously, writing a book is harder. Obviously, here there's a single subject matter, whereas a pamphlet often, when you're starting out writing the first pamphlet, you're kind of profiling yourself and trying out different techniques, addressing different subject matter. I think many poets agree that pamphlets or chapbooks are probably the perfect size. 28, 30 pages, it's enough to do something, to try something out. So full collections, a challenge, but I think I broke it down. As I say, I had 5 sections in the original manuscript, 6 in the end, and I decided, you know, let's have each section 11, 12 poems, and then they operate each in their own right. And that was kind of the building blocks of the book. So break it down into small pieces, I suppose, and then put it together. Yeah, I had to cull quite a few. And of course, I worry about all those poems that will never see the light of day, but that's for a reason, because you have to make tough decisions. And when I was talking to John McAuliffe, my editor, about the book, obviously it was growing. There comes a point where you just have to say, well, already 128 pages is enough, I think. But you can't reduce grief down. The reviews so far for the book have been very complimentary, and I'm very grateful to the reviewers, though a couple have questioned the size of the book, whether it's too long or not. But I don't think I'm repeating myself with the poems. It reads a bit like a novel, and, you know, novels are big. You know, novelists are allowed lots of words, lots of pages. So why aren't we as poets?
That's true. You lead quite a busy life. So how and when do you write?
Well, I used to go on writing weekends, writing weeks with the poetry business. Years ago, I went on residentials with Anne-Marie Fife. So I tend to write when I go away, I suppose, with friends. I go away for a few days. I've just been in Chroma with my workshop group, and we set ourselves writing tasks each morning, you know, to generate new work together. So I think writing together is really important. Sometimes I'll sit, you know, in a bar, in a cafe, and read a new poetry collection, and there'll be one poem in the book in particular that kind of inspires me, and I think I want to try to have a dialogue with that poem. Let's try to sit here and stare into the void until we get something on paper. And with an academic job, that obviously gives you a certain freedom in terms of your time when you're not teaching and you have research time, but you never know, do you, when the poem is ever going to come, and if another poem will ever come.
Yeah, it's true. It's always a new process when
You
you're
have to
writing.
sit down and force it. You have to force it sometimes.
Thank you. Could you read a poem of your choice, please?
Okay, I tend to read the same poems again and again so far in the last year of doing readings, because the book actually came out in June 23, so a year ago almost. The launch was in July, but this is one I've never read. It's called The Train to Soler or Soller in Mallorca, which is an absolutely stunning valley. You come out through this tunnel on this old wooden train, just majestic kind of view of nature. The Train to Soler. What a view, my God, what a view, my God, what a view, my God, what it was. I don't think it was, I don't think it was. I don't think and shake, the rattle and shake, the rattle and shake. The rattle could see, I wish you could see, I wish you could see. I wish you up high, that peak there up high, that peak there up high, that peak down below. The green down below, the green down below, the green here I know. You're still here, I know. You're still here, I know. You're tunnel won't end, this tunnel won't end, this tunnel won't end, this why did you go, but why did you go, but why did you go, but why and so wide, so steep and so wide, so steep and so wide, so steep on the ledge, propped proud on the ledge, propped proud on the two, the tickets for two, the tickets for two, the tickets, the cold, to hold back the cold, to hold back the cold, to hold back the pine, the palm plain and pine, the palm plain and pine, the palm on the floor, asleep on the floor, asleep on the floor, asleep on the sight, spectacular sight, spectacular sight, spectacular blue, the clear sky deep blue, the clear sky deep blue, the clear other signs, but no other signs, but no other signs, but no.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear you read it. It was one of my favorite poems in the collection. I just love this repetition and a mixture of what is external but reflecting what is going on internally.
I was on the train and you've got that movement of the train, you know, that particular music of the train, and then the thought processes going on as you're admiring the landscape. So you've got several things going on at the same time, and it just seemed to create a rhythm. And trains are always important. I always used to write on trains, just being on the move, you know.
Yes. Is there anything else you would like to mention that we haven't touched upon?
Not really. Maybe just the title, I guess, Hard Drive. I nearly called the book Angle Poise, which is the preface poem in the book. But I decided on Hard Drive in the end because Hard Drive, in this sense, is most immediately the actual physical hard drives of files and videos and photos and documents, everything that's in storage. And there's a whole section of the book about clearing a flat, putting stuff into storage. And that idea of our lives are there on a hard drive somewhere out there in the dark and behind a locked door. So hard drive was that most immediate meaning, but then there are all the hard drives of the book, you know, being driven to the mortuary, being driven to the crematorium, you know, being driven around to here, there, and everywhere by my great friend. The hard drive of trying to have the stamina to do this, to deal with a bereavement, which is a long journey. Well, it never ends, really. But a hard drive of also a relationship, you know, sustaining a relationship, the passion, maybe, you know, the good moments, the bad moments, the perseverance of being with someone, and the hard drive of dealing with death in someone's absence and then getting on with your life. So it seemed like a fitting title that could be interpreted in many ways.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of all the aspects of the title. I was thinking of the hard drive as an archive, someone's life, or like the time we shared together. But I like this idea of also hard drive as hard work or like effort.
I mean, the book is an archive, it's an inventory of sorts, but it's, I mean, a hard drive is a physical thing, a book is a physical thing, poems as object.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all this with us.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me to take part in Poetology and for speaking today. It's been really interesting to think about the book a bit more and to talk and to read my poem.
You're welcome. And I'll put the links to all of your books and social media and websites in the description box below. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks, Tab. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Please go and look at the description box below this video to click on Paul's many links, including his social media, website, and the links to purchase his book. Thanks again to Paul for taking part in this, and I hope to see you all again very soon in the next video. Bye!